Good morning. It is 5:30 a.m. if you're on the East Coast. It is 2:30 a.m. if you're up late with us on the West Coast. Donald Trump is on the verge of returning to the White House at this hour. The former president speaking to supporters earlier this morning, claiming victory, surrounded by family, telling supporters that they made history. The NBC decision desk has not yet called the presidency for Donald Trump, but realistically, we can say that Kamala Harris, the vice president, has no viable path to 270 in terms of electoral college votes at this point. Let's take a look at where things stand in those battleground states. We're going to start with Pennsylvania, which really was key to the statement I made a moment ago that Kamala Harris does not have a path anymore. It was when we called Pennsylvania that became true. 97% in, the projected winner, Donald Trump. Georgia, also in the column of Donald Trump, with 50% of the vote versus her 48 with 99% of the vote in. North Carolina, the Tar Heel state, Mr. Trump wins there as well with 97% of the vote in. Now, to those we have not called yet, Michigan, the race there, too close to call. And now we have a projection to make in Wisconsin.
Yes, we can.
NBC News projecting that Wisconsin was won by Donald Trump, and therefore, as you see on your screen, we are now projecting that the next president of the United States is Donald Trump.
He will reclaim the White House. The 45th president of the United States will become the 47th president of the United States, being elected for non-consecutive terms, a feat that has not been achieved since Grover Cleveland did it back in 1892. And there's the map. 276 electoral votes. You can see how he did it there. The blue wall has been shattered once again. Wisconsin putting him over. Chuck Todd is standing by the big board. We're going to take a look at precisely how he was able to do it in Wisconsin. But Chuck, President-elect Donald J. Trump.
And more importantly, he's going to win the popular vote. It's not done yet. It's, there's still more, but it's very likely. This is not like 2016 or 2020. He's going to be only the second Republican to win the popular vote this century. And by the way, we are now going to have 3 straight one-term presidents. The last time this country elected 3 straight one-term presidents was when a guy named Grover Cleveland won non-consecutive terms. It was in the aftermath of the Civil War, of post-Reconstruction. And frankly, I do think an era that rhymes with the era we're living in now. We were fighting about who's an American. It was a very divisive time. We had 6 straight presidential elections then, decided by 5 points or less. We are now on our 6 out of the last 7 in this country decided by 5 points or less. But let's take a look here, because in many ways, how he won Wisconsin is how he won Pennsylvania, is how he won there. So let me just show you. Here's Harris in Milwaukee County. This is what she was counting on here, just so you can see here. She just didn't get the same amount of vote out here. Just, and look, we're talking a state only decided by 30,000 votes, but she lost a little bit of ground there. Then you look at Dane County. She lost just a little bit of ground there to him, and it was just a little bit everywhere. And then you go and take a look at a place like Brown County, and Trump gained a little bit in all of his red counties. And you go along the lake here, and he gained a little bit. In fact, what were the Harris folks counting on in the northern tier? That in these rural counties, older white women would come over to their side. But his improvement among Hispanics, among younger voters, particularly men, clearly created the combination here, because it is similar across the board. The college towns were not as Democratic. The urban areas, turnout wasn't as much. And even in the suburbs, the turnout for Democrats was good, not great. And they needed great, especially if they were going to continue to lose the amount of Hispanic voters that they ended up losing tonight.
The 45th president of the United States, now the 47th president-elect of the United States. Kelly O'Donnell's with us. Ryan Noble's with us as well. We need to underscore this right now, right?
Yes.
Because this is the moment that NBC News has, our decision desk has projected that he is, in fact, the winner. We've been talking about it for hours.
99% confidence rating. We don't call it until we're hit there.
Exactly,
Yeah.
we project.
It's an extraordinary political achievement.
Especially, Kelly, when you consider where he was just 6 months ago. Here's a man, first of all, when he's sworn in January, he'll be the oldest ever at 78.
And remember when that was a thing, this election season.
Right. Survives 2 assassination attempts. Oh, by the way, he's a convicted felon. And here he has risen from the ashes yet again.
The moment in Butler, Pennsylvania, where he was bloodied and rose and raised his fist and said, fight, 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 might be the metaphor of this entire political experience for him. He has come back in a way that, remember, he had a busy, busy primary because his own party didn't think they were going to stick with him. The damage done by January 6th has fallen by the wayside. He found a message. When he was running for re-election against Joe Biden, it was keep America great. He went back to make America great again, reclaimed a bit of that. He infused the party with his family. His daughter-in-law, Laura Trump, became a co-chair of the party and very involved. His sons, very prominent in his race and in sort of the identity of the political brand. It's an extraordinary thing that he's going back to the White House, and we will be trying to understand it and trying to understand how much he will match up to the candidate that he has been and the things he's talked about. Who will he get rid of? Who will he try to extract some political penalty against? And tonight he had some tones of wanting to be a president for all. Will he live up to that?
Yeah, I thought it was pretty striking in his remarks that he never mentioned Kamala Harris's name, never mentioned Joe Biden's name, didn't even talk about Democrats. It was really just a purely celebratory mood, made a number, reiterated many of the promises that he made on the campaign trail. That might be a signal that he's going to try and reach out to the other side of the aisle, because under any circumstance, and, you know, this is a convincing win, it's fair to say, but it's, as Chuck pointed out, still very close. And half the country is waking up this morning to what they view as the worst possible news, that Donald Trump is going to be in the White House again. And so he has tended, his political career has been, for the most part, very combative, not really caring that much about people that don't love him. And he has an opportunity now. This is his last opportunity in the White House. He's only going to be there for 4 years. He's already got to start thinking about his legacy. And part of that might be trying to reach across the aisle, trying to find that common ground and create an agenda for all Americans.
Chuck, your numbers, by the way, we just put Chuck's numbers on the screen there. Those popular vote numbers. There's about a 5 million vote margin.
Yeah, and, you know, it'll close probably in half because of California. So the popular vote margin might be to 2 to 3 million. But we got to realize something else here. I mean, he's now the most transformational leader of the Republican Party since Reagan. And he has done something that, again, you know, he created a new Republican coalition. The last Republican to do that was not George W. Bush. It was Ronald Reagan.
Let me get to Von Hilliard again in Mar-a-Lago in Florida at Trump, well, what was Trump Party headquarters a little bit earlier this evening. Von, you've been, are you outside now? You're outside now. Von, you've been on this campaign for months.
I'm outside.
You've covered Trump for years, the first administration as well. Talk about what this projection means for the president-elect.
I think that what we are about to see is a very unique personality serve in the capacity of President of the United States, even more so than in his first administration. Chuck and Kelly covered that administration so closely. I covered it on the periphery, traveling around the country, talking to voters throughout his administration. And time and again, I heard supporters that were hoping, even during the trade wars, right? It was the farmers that saw the prices of their corn and soybeans drop. They weren't even able to break even, yet they hoped that Donald Trump was going to be able to strike trade deals that would benefit them in the long run. There was a lot of hope and aspirations of voters in the United States that they have in Donald Trump. New voters, voters of color, young voters who have grown up with Donald Trump is effectively the godfather of this Republican Party. And when I say he's a unique personality, it's because of the individuals who we should expect to see him surround himself with in this administration. Here at his rally in West Palm Beach tonight, there wasn't Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis or Tim Scott or, of course, Brian Kemp, the governor of Georgia, or Doug Ducey, the former governor of Arizona, or Mike Pence, his former vice president. It was the likes of Tucker Carlson and Speaker Mike Johnson and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Elon Musk. Donald Trump ran in a way in which he felt uncompelled to go and reach out to the old establishment wing of the conservative party. And in 2022, I think that this is the moment when we go back in history of what led to this moment. It was Donald Trump when politically it was viewed as his stock being lowest. He went around and got involved in Republican primaries, specifically House races. There were 10 House Republicans who voted to impeach him in the aftermath of the January 6th attack. He effectively was able to purge 8 of those 10 individuals, including Liz Cheney. She lost her race in Wyoming by 50 percentage points. Donald Trump was able to remake the Republican Party in his image, which going into the presidential primaries, Ron DeSantis, Mike Pence, Nikki Haley, they jumped into that race. But when I was going around talking to voters time and again, even in South Carolina, there were folks that were telling me, Nikki Haley and Tim Scott, they shouldn't get in the race. This is Donald Trump's moment to take back the party and to take back the country that they felt was stolen from him. Donald Trump went on a crusade to convince Americans that he was a sympathetic figure, that the election of 2020 was stolen from him, and that the charges against him and the 4 criminal indictments, they were politically targeted. Over the course of these last 3 years, we now know here tonight, with Donald Trump becoming president of the United States, along with issues like immigration and the economy, of course, but he was effectively able to convince the majority of the American electorate that voted this month that he should be going back to the White House despite everything, all of the attacks, the charges against him, and that this was his moment. And now, upon going to the White House, he has a Republican Party in the U.S. Senate and in the U.S. House that will be devoutly loyal to him. And for any members of the military, any Democrats even, that look to go and seek to have some sort of ability to work with him in Washington, D.C., it's going to be incumbent upon them to understand that Donald Trump is of the belief that he only needs loyalty, that he does not need to go and strike any negotiations, because so far politically over the course of 9 years, it led him back into the White House and a mandate effectively from the voters who selected him to get back there tonight.
Vaughn, I know you've spent some time really thinking about this, reporting how we got to tonight and this historic day. Let's take a look at your report.
This is a magnificent victory for the American people.
A political resurrection unlike any other in American history.
I want to thank you. I will not let you down. America's future will be bigger, better, bolder, richer, safer, and stronger than it has ever been before.
Tonight, Donald Trump winning back the White House, an unlikely comeback after losing the 2020 election, and a violent attack on the Capitol by his supporters, attempting to overturn the election results. Those supporters encouraged by President Trump's false claims of 2020 election fraud.
All of us here today do not want to see our election victory stolen by emboldened radical left Democrats, which is what they're doing.
Top Republicans initially condemning him for his role provoking the attackers.
All I can say is count me out. Enough is enough.
The president bears responsibility for Wednesday's attack on Congress by mob rioters.
But soon reversing course and embracing Trump once again, recognizing his power with Republican voters. In the 2022 midterms, Trump worked to get his allies elected and his enemies ousted.
The people of Wyoming are going to tell her, Liz, you're fired. Get out of here.
Many candidates who echoed Trump's false claims that the 2020 election was stolen lost to Democrats. But just 1 week later, Trump announced his bid for re-election.
This will not be my campaign. This will be our campaign all together.
In the months that followed, he was indicted on federal charges in Florida and D.C., and state charges in New York and Georgia. The Republican presidential hopefuls like Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis saw an opening.
We can't have, as Republicans, him as the nominee.
But Trump trounced the primary field in Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and then South Carolina, handily winning the party's nomination.
And we want to have unity, and we're going to have unity, and it's going to happen very quickly. What happened?
In the campaign's final tumultuous months, Trump survived an assassination attempt.
The assassin's bullet came within a quarter of an inch of taking my life.
And a change in his opponent which he falsely called a coup.
This was an overthrow of a president.
He ran his campaign on his terms and often on falsehoods. He hit the trail with his own unique coalition of allies. And tens of thousands of faithful supporters packing arenas and venues from California to Wisconsin to Madison Square Garden. Non-consecutive White House wins, a feat only one president, Grover Cleveland, has accomplished before. Now, Donald Trump will be president number 45 and 47.
8 years ago, Donald Trump, he interviewed potential cabinet and administration officials at his Trump Tower penthouse in Midtown Manhattan. He's now a Florida resident, and we can expect the transition process and that interview process to take place here in Florida at his Mar-a-Lago estate. I am also told, just like 8 years ago, when he went on what his campaign called a thank you tour as president-elect, in which he went around the country to address American voters that helped elect him, I'm told to expect a rally of similar sorts to take place, quote, soon here in the days and the weeks ahead. Guys.
All right, Vaughn Hilliard, thank you so much for that reporting. I'm Kate Snow. Craig Melvin has actually left the table, just so no one's confused here. He has to go prepare for the Today Show. But I want to turn to Danny Savalos, who's joined us at the table, our legal analyst. This is something we haven't really talked about yet tonight, but now that we have President-elect Trump, what happens to all these legal battles that he's been fighting, particularly the ones that were supposed to be sentencing was supposed to be coming up soon?
On a night where we're all very careful not to make predictions, I'm about to make a bunch with a lot of confidence, and they have to do with Trump's legal cases. Here are things that I think we can say with a lot of confidence. He has 4 outstanding criminal cases. 2 are federal, 2 are state cases. The federal cases are going to go away. They're going to go away in a number of different ways. He can appoint an attorney general who will simply do his bidding and dismiss the cases. He can instruct the Justice Department to not even bother with the appeal of the already dismissed federal case. Those cases are, for all intents and purposes, gone. That leaves the state court cases. We have New York, and we have a sentencing, not only a sentencing coming up in a couple of weeks, but Justice Merchan is also deciding a motion to dismiss. This is all happening in the next couple of weeks.
Remind people which case that is.
This is the case that he was, the only case that he was tried and convicted on here in the state of New York several months ago, and he's awaiting sentencing on that case.
This was around Stormy Daniels.
Exactly. It had to do with hush money payments and reimbursements to Michael Cohen related to an alleged affair with Stormy Daniels. So that case, in all likelihood, that sentencing might get adjourned now. But even if it weren't, even if it were to go forward on November 26th, in all likelihood, it's not a case that he's going to get prison time on. Now, reasonable minds can disagree. I'm approaching this as a criminal defense attorney. This is barely a felony in New York. Yes, it's 34 counts, but you have all the factors that lead towards somebody getting a non-incarceration sentence. You have somebody over 70 years old. Like a house arrest, maybe straight probation. You have someone over 75 years old, no guns, no drugs, no violence. These are things that New York courts see and sentence on every day. So in the spectrum of criminals who might be able to get a probation-only or house arrest sentence, Donald Trump is in a high likelihood. That's even if that case goes forward this month for sentencing. It might not. The real question is, will prosecutors agree to an adjournment, given that Donald Trump just won the election? That's kind of an X factor. Then you have Georgia, and Georgia is, I'm going to use a legal term, a disaster. That legal case is in a vortex. By the way, it hasn't been stayed. It's technically moving along, and we've heard nothing about it in the last several months. It is
because of a bunch of things that happened with the prosecutor.
Exactly
right. Get down in the rabbit hole.
Fair to say, again, I'm going to go out on a limb. The prosecutor in the Georgia case, the elected prosecutor, made some bad decisions along the way. And so because of those decisions, the case is now mired in appeal, and she may get disqualified. If it does, if that case is orphaned, then they have to find a new prosecutor to take it on. But let's say, for example, the case will still be pending when Donald Trump is inaugurated. Let's assume that it is. It will likely, all the state cases, to the extent they're still pending, will be stayed. And that's because of the Constitution's supremacy clause. In all likelihood, those cases will be put on pause. And 4 years from now, who knows what the political situation will be in Fulton County, Georgia. If that DA will still be even the DA, or if that case will have been tossed because the DA has been disqualified. So the state court cases, New York doesn't pose a tremendous threat to Donald Trump, even though it's why he's a felon. He's not likely to get sentenced to any serious prison time. Again, reasonable minds can and do disagree with me on this point, but I don't think it's likely. And Georgia, I just don't think they can get that case together. By the way, let's say miraculously they brought it to trial. The last high-profile RICO case in Georgia was the longest case in Georgia history. It took them 8 months to select a jury. Fulton County is just not good at speedy trials in complex cases. I'm sorry to say. And so Donald Trump's case may never see the light of day in Georgia.
So it sounds like the headline, bottom line here, is he's unlikely to see any legal consequences or any major legal cases go forward during his presidency.
One thing we haven't talked about is all the civil cases against him. And he's faced many millions of consequences as a result of those civil cases, including E. Jean Carroll. All of those are things that, in all likelihood, he's not going to get the benefit of, say, an immunity decision. I mean, theoretically, he could. But so he is on the hook for those civil cases. They will move forward.
Even as president of the United States.
Sure. Well, yes, there are immunity issues, but those will survive. In theory, they'll be back on the hook if he has a judgment against him after he gets out of office. So civil consequences are not the same as criminal consequences. And he has suffered criminal consequences. He's a felon. He is going to be, when the smoke clears, if Justice Merchan does not dismiss the case, which he might do next week, but if that case survives, if that conviction survives, he is a felon. He may not serve a prison term, but if it survives, I mean, that certainly is something that is not a desirable status for an American citizen. But in all likelihood, I think we might see the sentencing adjourned. And even New York, that case could get thrown out by Justice Merchan based on immunity, based on a pending motion to dismiss.
All right, that was a lot of legal talk, but
we
really appreciate it. I think a lot of people, have been wondering out there. Let's go back to a couple of our insiders. Who do we have with us? Matt Gorman and Stephen Hayes are standing by for us. Hello, gentlemen. You're over on the other side of the studio now. I can't see you. Apologies. Can I get just from each of you your final thought as we head into the morning? It's almost 6 a.m. Eastern time now. What do you see this day and these coming weeks looking like?
First of all, it's a tremendous political resurrection. I think you put it exactly right. A realignment of sorts in many different ways when it comes to segments of the population. And what I'm interested to see now is, look, Trump only has one term. And so now, how does he govern? What is his legacy without a re-election to worry about? And then what do other Republicans and Democrats do in reaction? Because 2028 is maybe not so far away now.
And Stephen, to you, the same question. What do you see in these coming weeks?
Yeah, I was really struck looking at Vaughn's package, thinking about back to January 6th, and he was really left for dead. I mean, Lindsey Graham, all of his biggest supporters, nobody wanted anything to do with him. And not only did he survive that, but he has made this sort of dramatic comeback to the point where you had a party rallying around him. And if you look at the exit poll data today, you look at the number of people who said that they thought that democracy was at stake in this election, more of them nationwide voted for Donald Trump than voted for Kamala Harris, despite the fact that she made this sort of the centerpiece of the end of her campaign.
Ryan Nobles, on January 20th, 2025, Mr. Trump will become the president of these United States. You cover Congress. We know the Senate now has Republican control. We don't know about the House just yet, if he'll have a divided government or not.
That's right. And I think that's the biggest open question right now. Is what type of Congress is he going to be forced to work with? If he has a Democratic House, that's going to make it a lot more difficult for him to get his agenda over the finish line. But if he has a willing Republican House to work with, there's no limit to what he could possibly accomplish. And it's also important to keep in mind that there are a lot of these members, particularly the House of Representatives. I think of Congressman Matt Gaetz, for instance, of Florida, who had a dust-up with the former speaker, was almost thought to be an outsider. He's now going to be very much on the inside, a direct line to the president. So there's going to be
Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Marjorie Taylor Greene is another one. So there are going to be a lot of members of Congress who have bet on Donald Trump, who are going to see that bet pay off as a result of what we saw here tonight.
And I'm struck by, in the Democratic Party, there will be people like Gretchen Whitmer and Josh Shapiro and Gavin Newsom, who will be thinking, okay, he has one term, meaning Mr. Trump has one term
to prepare for a presidential.
Prepare for the next, and how to define the party. And Tim Walz goes back to Minnesota as the sitting governor. With her, Kamala Harris, what happens to her? And in the remaining 10 weeks or so of the Biden presidency, President Biden will certainly try to fortify policies he's put in place, try to create a legacy piece. It will be a difficult 10 weeks for them. And of course, because she's vice president, she will be in the role that Mike Pence had 4 years ago, confirming his election as president.
Chuck Todd, I want to get one final thought from you.
Well, look, I do think one of the things I thought about with this election is which president are voters going to be thinking about when they go into the voting booth? Donald Trump or Joe Biden? I think it's pretty clear tonight a lot of people walked in there thinking about Joe Biden. And Kamala Harris was trying to get them to think about Donald Trump. She wanted this to be a referendum on Donald Trump. And when you look at this, his 40% job rating, people's state of the economy, and how nearly half of voters thought they were falling behind, that's to me, they were thinking about Joe Biden. One other thing about Kamala Harris, I actually had a conversation with a well-known Democrat yesterday, and I was asking the what if, and they said, well, if she chose to run for governor, which is an open, Gavin Newsom is term limited, governor of California, this person thought that she'd be very difficult to stop. So, she's not, sometimes Democrats throw away their nominees. Kamala Harris does have standing in California. And I do think she still has some standing in the party because I don't think people blame her. I do think the party's going to blame Biden.
She's only 60 years old as well.
In politics, that's super young.
Very young.
That's teenage-like, yes.
Thank you all so much. And thank you for watching our NBC News special coverage of the 2024 election. Don't go anywhere. Coverage continues with a special edition of the Today Show. That is coming up next. I'm Kate Snow in New York. For all my friends here with me on this overnight shift, thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.